So, that Invincible finale got pretty real. After Mark and Omni Man finally had their big bloody confrontation, it might seem like the show already peaked in its first season. I mean, how can they possibly top the intense violence from that last episode? Well, it turns out that while Nolan is brutal, he's actually pretty chill by Viltrumite standards. Trust me, when you meet the rest of them, that subway scene is going to seem tame by comparison. Spoilers ahead for both the upcoming seasons of Invincible and the comic series it's based on. In the last episode of Invincible, we watched Nolan Grayson punch his son through a city like it was made of paper. Except this time, it highlighted the undeniable collateral damage these skyscraper-obliterating superhero smackdowns would have instead of ignoring them. In any other story, it would be safe to assume that Nolan was set up to be the final boss of the series. Well, as you'll soon figure out, Nolan is actually not the strongest Viltrumite there is. Sure, he's probably still in the upper leagues, but there are plenty of other Viltrumites like Conquest and Thrag, who are not only at his level of power or higher, but are also 3 times as vicious. Seriously, Conquest would think the part where Nolan used Mark's body to break through a subway car's worth of people was pretty boring. So if Viltrumites are so powerful, why was Nolan sent on his own to conquer Earth? Well, long ago, the Viltrumites came into a brutal conflict with their worst enemy, other Viltrumites. When a rogue Viltrumite committed regicide against Emperor Argyll, the entire empire was thrown into chaos. The Viltrumites raged against each other, brutalizing thousands until they felt like they were left with just the cream of the crop, like a giant version of the Purge. The most powerful members of the Empire survived this and rebuilt their empire into what they considered a utopia. They were so pleased with this progress that they pushed for a galactic expansion and spread their empire across the stars. Of course, the thing all science fiction has taught us is that creating a giant galactic empire and keeping it are 2 very different things. If only they had Star Wars on Viltrum, maybe their story would have gone differently. There are few beings in the galaxy who have had the effect on it that Thadeus has. The rogue Viltrumite who assassinated Emperor Argyll started the Civil War and then abandoned his people is arguably responsible for a good deal of the carnage that has spread over the universe. It turns out that he agreed with this assessment. He took in the leaders of the conquered planets and formed the Coalition of Planets to rebel against the Viltrumites. In order to hide himself from the prejudices the other races have against Viltrumites, he hid his real identity while presiding over the Coalition. Through his deception and his diplomatic skills, he was able to form a Grand Galactic Council to stand up to the Empire. This is actually the organization that the lovable Alan the Alien was working for when he visited Earth. If you can't already tell, his budding friendship with Mark is eventually going to expand into the 2 beating up Viltrumites together for the Coalition. Fighting a force like the Viltrumites seems impossible. I mean, how do you build an army to defend the galaxy against an army of Superman-level warriors who cut their teeth by slaying as many Superman-level warriors as they could? Well, you really don't. That's why Thadeus came up with a more twisted solution to the Viltrumite issue. A special pathogen known as the Scourge Virus was developed to take the Viltrumites down. In the end, 99.9% of Viltrumites were destroyed, leaving a sparse number of warriors left to guard over the Empire. While that would have utterly destroyed any other empire, the Viltrumites are so powerful that a small group of them were still enough to reign over their conquered worlds. I mean, they usually drop 1 Viltrumite to conquer an entire planet, so it doesn't exactly require an army of them to scare the galaxy into submission. All of this building intergalactic tension eventually explodes into a giant event known as the Viltrumite War. This is widely considered to be one of the best Invincible stories, if not the best arc in the entire series. The brutal, bone-crunching combat that Invincible revels in comes to a head as Mark, Omni Man, Alan, and a united front of other aliens have a showdown with the Viltrumite Empire. If you thought that Mark got beaten to a pulp in Season 1, that is nothing compared to the damage he takes from Conquest. I mean, you don't even see any of his internal organs in Season 1. I feel like it's really not considered a worthy Viltrumite brawl if one or both of the combatants still have all their intestines in place. By the time the conflict is over, Mark's beating is nothing compared to just how decimated both the Coalition and the Empire are. The Viltrumite War really turns up the heat on the entire Invincible series. A lot of conflicts that have been simmering for centuries finally come to a head as the Coalition and the Viltrumite Empire stage their final showdown. The Coalition gets pretty brutalized as the Viltrumites rage through their planet like flying wrecking balls. As it turns out, karma comes hard for the Viltrumites. Mark, Nolan, and Thadeus all fly through Viltrumite's core, obliterating the planet. So just like the Scions and Kryptonians before them, the Viltrumites lose their home planet forever. This, of course, only serves to push Thrag and the other Viltrumites even harder. There are several decapitations, fist impalings, and dismemberments before they eventually come to an understanding. That's right. One of the most brutal comic book storylines ends with a surprisingly peaceful agreement. The Viltrumites move to Earth but agree not to conquer it until their species has regained their numbers. That may not sound ideal, but as far as peace agreements with Viltrumites go, this is historic. It can be kind of hard to describe just how powerful Viltrumites are. I mean, we've seen Nolan utterly obliterate an entire planet by himself, but we haven't really seen anyone else who truly compares to his level so far in the series. That is, with one exception. One of the best fights in the first season was when the warrior known as Battle Beast fought Mark and the new Guardians of the Globe. Despite the fact that he was terribly outnumbered, Battle Beast was able to take them down with very little effort. He even acknowledges that the fight is unworthy of his strength. You know what's not unworthy of his strength? A fight against a well-trained Viltrumite warrior. Battle Beast's showdown with Thrag is widely considered to be the best fight in the entire series. So the next time you watch that fight where Battle Beast tears through the Guardians, just know that Thrag was not only able to take him on, but actually defeated him after days of battle. Then he skinned him and made his hide into a cape. That is what's coming for our poor Mark Grayson. It doesn't really seem weird that Nolan was able to make a son on Earth. He has that Kryptonian alien look where he basically seems 100% human except for all the superpowers. The series takes the implications of alien inbreeding and answers all the questions that literally no one ever asked you, Robert Kirkman. After things with his family had a very violent and humiliating ending, Nolan made good on his promise to go to a new planet and start a new family. Only this family was from a community of ant people who grew much faster than humans. It turns out that Viltrumites can interbreed with all sorts of species, regardless of whether or not they're genetically similar to them. His second son Oliver even looked more Viltrumite the older he got, despite the fact that his mother looked like the drummer ant from Ant-Man and the Wasp. Those Viltrumite genes don't understand the word recessive. Perhaps the biggest secret in Viltrumite culture is what happened to the progeny of Emperor Argyll. While Thrag operated as the leader of the Empire, he was never allowed to call himself the Emperor because Argyll's heir was somewhere out there. Well, take a guess as to who is that heir. That's right, Nolan Grayson is the secret heir to the Empire, and thus so is Mark. After the Viltrumite War, this is revealed, and Nolan takes his place as the Emperor like he's on an intergalactic Game of Thrones with a more satisfying ending. You wouldn't think so due to the brutality he displays on the way out of Earth, but Nolan actually serves as the ultimate reformer of the Viltrumites. Ultimately, he's the one that ends their threat forever by making the Viltrumites a more peaceful race capable of coexisting with the galaxy. That's right. They managed to take Nolan from the guy who punches his own son through a skyscraper to one of the greatest humanitarians who ever lived. So he's basically the opposite of Daenerys Targaryen. If there's one thing about Omni Man that's more impressive than his super strength or his ability to fly, it's his sweet mustache. Nolan has joined the ranks of Ron Swanson, Sam Elliott, and Tom Selleck in the Mustache Hall of Fame. The only problem is that it isn't unique to Omni Man at all. For reasons that are never properly explained, every single Viltrumite man has the exact same mustache. What's even worse is that Nolan's isn't even the best stash in the Empire. It's not enough that Thrag is arguably the strongest Viltrumite in the series, but his look is utterly flawless. Here's to hoping the series elaborates on why exactly this is a mandatory look for every Viltrumite male in the Empire, or what the no doubt deadly consequences are for shaving it. If only there was a way to get more Invincible right now. Like, imagine if there were like 144 stories that I could buy and read right now straight from Robert Kirkman. What a world that would be.